now getting into our first segment of the day, talking about the Broncos' plans to release Russell Wilson. Yesterday, we got the news that they have informed him of the planned release. Now, he will technically be on the roster until the start of the new league year, which will be March 13th. So we are just outside of a week from now. He will officially become a free agent. Now, this is definitely an interesting decision, a little bit controversial, not all too surprising ultimately, but this does result in the Broncos having to take on $85 million in dead money over the next 2 seasons. That is over double the largest dead cap hit in NFL history. When the Falcons did so, moving on from Matt Ryan, that was $40.5 million. And now the Broncos are going to be at 85. So that is very detrimental, of course, to a team building process in terms of investing so much money, so much of your cap into a player that will not be in the building at all. And I do think that it is pretty telling that the Broncos were willing to eat this dead money, because that just shows how they felt about Russell Wilson. Now, there's a handful of different factors that play into this. It is his performance, of course, on the field, but there were a handful of various different weird stories that came out from the locker room, such as how he had his own office, and there was reportedly some sort of feeling of entitlement that didn't necessarily go all too well within the locker room. Of course, the Broncos front office definitely deserves blame as well for how this played out, especially towards the end of last season, how ugly things got there. So we will get into all of that. If you were to be coming into this situation not having watched any of the past 2 years, and you looked at Russell Wilson's raw numbers, you would be very surprised by this. In the 20 games that he started for the Broncos since they traded for him, he had 6,594 passing yards, 42 touchdowns, just 19 interceptions, just 19. 19 still a good amount, but still a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of touchdown to interception for Wilson, and a 63% completion percentage. So not terrible, but if you did watch the games, you kind of have to trust your eyes on this one. Halfway through the year, it seemed like Sean Payton, I should say, the Broncos head coach that they had just signed this year. So keep in mind as well the fact that Payton was not, and Payton, for the stature that he has as a coach, is going to be a Hall of Famer. He wasn't part of the move to bring in Russell Wilson, and he clearly had an issue with Wilson. He sort of switched up the offense in terms of some of the philosophical stuff to sort of limit the potential mistakes from Wilson. A pretty damning number for Wilson in this is the fact that despite having the third most time to throw in the NFL during his tenure in Denver, 3.02 seconds, he was sacked 100 times, which was the most of any quarterback during the past 2 years. Meanwhile, his offensive line ranked 8th in pass rush win rate. So I know I just threw a lot of stats at you, but essentially to summarize that, a lot of it was Wilson holding on to the ball too long, not being decisive enough, and Sean Payton, who of course coached Drew Brees and the Saints to a Super Bowl win. Drew Brees was an excellent anticipation thrower, great accuracy, decision making, all of those things. Russell Wilson's play style, if you look at his career as a whole, he's been more of an improviser, trying to extend plays with his legs. Granted, while playing for a Seahawks team, I know during those Super Bowl years, they had some really great offensive linemen on the roster, but down the stretch of his career in Seattle, the offensive line was not very good, and he was needing to run around a little bit more. But we just saw him sort of get stuck in that way for a lot of it, and as a result, we saw him getting sacked. These negative plays really hurt the Broncos over the course of these past couple seasons. And we also just don't see Russell Wilson playing with that same level of athleticism that he had during those prime Seattle years. So, Sean Payton, he tried to hurry Wilson up, throwing a lot more underneath action plays at Wilson, trying to play with, a lot simpler almost of play concepts in terms of trying to make Wilson just make the play that is right in front of him, not going for the big chunk yardage plays, but just taking what is right in front of him. And as a result, this is, keep in mind, a very arbitrary stat. So don't, take it all to the bank with this stat. But Wilson had just 4.5 air yards per completion this season. That was the fourth lowest in the NFL. He was ahead of Mac Jones, and then Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes were both below 4.5 as well. So again, it's definitely not a perfect stat, but keep in mind as well the fact that Burrow was dealing with an injury, especially the calf injury earlier in the year. He wasn't very mobile. He couldn't put the same level of power on the throws, so they had to have a lot more shorter action. And Patrick Mahomes, obviously the entire storyline around the Chiefs during the regular season was the fact that he had no faith in his receivers. They were letting him down, and as a result, they were just trying to simplify things for the Chiefs receivers as opposed to the quarterback in the situation. And I do like a lot of the Broncos receiving options. Are they elite necessarily? No, but I think that Courtland Sutton doesn't necessarily get enough credit for how good he is. Jerry Jeudy, maybe not quite as good as he was necessarily projected to be coming into the league, but still a very solid player as well. They've had a variety of different tight ends as well that I think are very nice pass catchers as well. So we just saw, as a result, Wilson being put in this more simplified offense. He was asked to do less. As far as next generation stats, his aggressiveness, they actually have a statistic for that dropped from last season to this season as well. So looking back at this Russell Wilson trade, because as much as we can criticize Russell Wilson for not playing up to expectations, the Broncos also paid a very steep price for him and then didn't do a great job of putting him in the best position to succeed. The Broncos traded 2 first-round picks last year and in 2023, 2 second-round picks, and a 5th-round pick, along with 3 different players: Drew Lock, Noah Fant, and defensive tackle Shelby Harris. Now, all of these draft picks have panned out since then. It included offensive tackle Charles Cross, defensive back Devin Witherspoon, and linebacker Boye Mafe. All of them play for the Seahawks now, and all of them have been very good starters for the Seahawks. Meanwhile, Wilson here, he got a 5-year deal worth $242.6 million from the Broncos just to go 11-19 with him as a starter and end up releasing him with all of that dead money going into the 3rd season of the deal. The offense was very bad under Wilson, and again, not entirely all on his fault. Keep in mind that they hired Nathaniel Hackett as a head coach in Denver last year, and as Sean Payton put it, it was one of the worst head coaching jobs that we've seen in the NFL in recent time, and that is absolutely true. Hackett was a little bit of a disaster, just especially considering he played that primetime game against the Seahawks and was openly had no idea how to manage the clock situation. He had to bring somebody else in to help him with that. And when that all went down, even at the time, I was saying, well, that's a very bad look. But if you are at least willing to acknowledge that this isn't your strong suit, you need some help there and focus on the things that you do well, then all power to you at some point. If you are willing to take an ego check for the betterment of the team, go for it. The issue is nothing else got better as a result either. He was fired, I believe it was 15 games into the season. So things were really ugly there to start off Wilson's tenure in Denver, and it never really got all that much better. Like I mentioned, scored just 19.3 points per game in the Russell Wilson starts. And they now, even after trying to unload Russell Wilson, they need to clear another $15 million to get under the salary cap for next year. So the Broncos are in very rough shape right now. And that is also considering the fact that there's a real chance that they're going to have to deal with some repercussions from the handling of the situation with Wilson late last year. They were still roughly in playoff contention, and they threatened to bench Russell Wilson if he didn't give up his injury guaranteed money. And I meant to mention this on the show yesterday, talking about the Combine, but the hosts of the Ringer NFL Draft Show, they were present at the Combine last week, and they mentioned on their podcast on a show at the end of last week about how when quarterback prospects Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix Jr. were asked about the Broncos, there was an awkward hesitation. And I think that the Broncos really hurt themselves in terms of public reputation, to the entire NFL community, and especially to some of the players. It is an interesting situation there. So as far as what's next for Wilson, we covered this a little bit last week after he did the interview on the I Am Athlete podcast, where he sees himself being able to compete for more Super Bowls. He specifically wants 2 more. That's likely a stretch. Priority should just be to find a locker room he can be the starting quarterback of. And it's hard to believe that he isn't one of the best 32 quarterbacks entering next season, but the openings are pretty scarce for him in terms of the market. The 3 teams that absolutely need to go get a quarterback next year are the Vikings, the Falcons, and the Raiders. Vikings are a little interesting. They have been heavily attached to Kirk Cousins, but CBS's Cody Benjamin put out a story this morning about how head coach Kevin O'Connell hinted at the idea that Kirk Cousins has spoke to other teams about potentially joining them and about potentially leaving the Vikings this offseason. So we'll keep you updated with all of that. Vikings could be an opening. And then there are some maybes in there of franchises that could probably use a quarterback. That includes the Patriots, the Steelers, the Titans, the Giants, and the Saints. Now, a whole lot of speculation about these teams. The Patriots have the 3rd overall pick, so if they wanted to go the draft route, they have a pick in the range of one of those top tier quarterback prospects. The Steelers have been a team that's been sort of in the media attached to potentially going after a Wilson or after a veteran quarterback, but The Athletic reported this morning that the Steelers aren't interested in signing a veteran QB. That includes Wilson, Cousins, and Baker Mayfield as well. Now, we've gotten a couple of these reports, so I think that that's the direction that I am personally headed in belief that they are going to go into next season with Kenny Pickett as their starting quarterback. And then some of these other teams, again, where the Giants signed Daniel Jones to a contract last year. I don't think it would be the worst thing maybe to bring him in as well and have him compete for the job. Saints paid Derek Carr, who had a disappointing season. The Titans, Ryan Tannehill is going to be a free agent, but he also lost his job to Will Levis that they used a high second-round draft pick on last season. So, again, none of these situations really scream this is going to be a great spot for Wilson to find a role in. I think there's a pretty good chance he could not be a starting quarterback on opening day next year. Maybe take a little bit of a Joe Flacco route and work his way back into a roster when injuries occur. I'm not sure if there's just the glaring opportunity there for him right now that would set him up in the best possible position to succeed. It's been reported that he may be willing to sign for a minimum contract, so perhaps that makes it easier for one of these teams to take a flyer on him. But I think that the whole situation has just not panned out in a very positive light for Russell Wilson, and I think that there is a chance, especially for a minimum contract, that he could potentially, have some sort of a rejuvenation. The Falcons, I've talked about them plenty this offseason. I think that that should be a pretty appealing quarterback job, but I also don't think that Wilson would be the number one option for a team like the Falcons or any of these other openings. But that is, sort of where we stand as of today. Now, again, officially becomes a free agent on March 13th. Maybe we'll get some sort of momentum leading up to that. But for now, that is all we have on the subject. We are going to be taking our first break of the show. And when we come back on the other end, we will be talking some NFL free agency and the latest on the franchise tag deadline buzz. So stick with us and we will be right back.